Season 3 of Squid Game brought the most brutal games yet. But what if I told you there was a way to survive each and every one? Today we're breaking down the strategies that could have saved players, one game at a time, starting with one of the scariest. 1. Hide and seek. In the very first game of Squid Game Season 3, players were randomly assigned one of two balls, red or blue. At first glance, the twist seemed simple enough. Red meant seeker, you got a knife and a target. Blue meant hider, you got a key and a lead time. But the conditions were far from balanced. Seekers were on a time limit 30 minutes to eliminate at least one hider. Fail, and you die. Hiders, on the other hand, had two options. Survive until time ran out, or collect 3 matching keys to unlock an exit and escape the arena. The mechanics made it look like a game of stealth versus aggression. Run, hide, deceive, or track, stab, and survive. On paper, it was a strategic game, but in practice it became a brutal collapse of logic and trust. Player 120, Yunju, should have been the ideal survivor. She had military training, high spatial awareness, and unlike most others, didn't panic under pressure. Early in the round, she quickly mapped out a route through the upper levels of the structure, avoiding the seeker hotspots and planning a quiet escape path. She even managed to find one of the rare 3-key clusters that most players overlooked. For a brief moment, it looked like she would be the first to beat the game without confrontation. But then everything fell apart. Hyunju heard cries from below. Gyumja and Junhee had been cornered by multiple seekers and couldn't find cover. Instead of escaping, Hyunju turned back. She retraced her steps, exposed herself, and made her way back into the most dangerous part of the map, all to help 2 players she barely knew. It was a moment of pure humanity in a game designed to destroy it, and the game responded exactly as expected. Before she could complete the rescue, player 333 Myunggi ambushed her from a blind spot and stabbed her in the back. She died seconds later, and her body fell right next to the people she tried to save. Myunggi took her keys, confirmed a kill for the Seekers, and walked away untouched. One of the most capable players in the game eliminated herself. Not through failure, but through compassion. And she wasn't the only one. Player 007, Youngzik, also believed he could outplay the system by thinking emotionally. When his mother received a red ball and he a blue one, he made a desperate attempt to swap roles. He thought being the Seeker would give him a better chance of protecting her, but what he failed to understand was that swapping didn't eliminate the dilemma. It just passed it on. Later in the game, his mother came face to face with him, her own son, threatening Junhee and the baby she carried. And in that impossible moment, she made the choice to kill her own son, believing it was the only way to prevent even greater tragedy. Youngsik's sacrifice didn't save anyone. It destroyed both of them. One died trying to protect, the other lived with the guilt of being forced to choose. These weren't clever strategies gone wrong. They were emotional decisions, in a world where emotion was the most dangerous liability. The people who acted out of loyalty or morality died quickly. The people who hesitated, who looked back, who cared, were erased. On the surface, hide and seek looked like it rewarded clever thinking. Avoid conflict, outsmart your enemies, collect keys, and get out. But none of that mattered if you couldn't detach yourself. In reality, survival didn't come from being the smartest or fastest. It came from being detached, cold, uninvolved. The ones who made it through didn't rely on plans. They relied on silence. They didn't help others. They didn't switch roles. They didn't play hero. They just stayed quiet, disappeared into the map, and waited for others to bleed out. The game wasn't testing strategy, it was testing whether you were willing to watch others die without stepping in. And the moment you did, you were next. 2. Jump rope. Next came one of the season's most physically punishing challenges. On the surface, it looked deceptively simple. Cross a narrow bridge while jumping over a massive swinging rope. But this wasn't some childhood game. The rope was controlled by the Younghee and Cheolsu dolls, and with each rotation, it got faster, lower, and more erratic. The bridge itself was narrow enough to discourage the 2 people from standing side by side. There were no safety rails, no resting points. One misstep, one mistimed jump, and it was over. The early minutes of the game were tense, but structured. Players fell into a rhythm, some counted beats, others mimicked the timing of the dolls. The general idea was clear. Stay calm, jump on cue, don't look down. In theory, coordination and pacing should have been enough to get across, but that theory didn't survive the reality of fear. Because this game wasn't just testing balance, it was exposing panic. The further players got onto the bridge, the more the rope sped up. Missed cues increased, people started stumbling, and then Inevitably, someone fell. Not from the rope, but from another player's hands. Player 096 was one of the first to cross. He didn't struggle, he didn't hesitate. He looked like someone who had trained for this. But then once he reached the halfway point, something in him shifted. He looked back and saw a crowd of people still waiting for their turn. Hesitant, scared, slowing down the process. So he started pushing. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't strategic, it was raw, instinctive survival. He shoved the player directly behind him off the bridge, then blocked others from moving forward. In his mind, the fewer people on the bridge, the better his chances of being one of the survivors. And from a purely tactical point of view, he wasn't wrong. But his move had ripple effects that destroyed the entire round. The group behind him panicked. No one knew who to trust. Players began shouting over each other, trying to establish a new order, but it was already too late. People stopped watching the rope and started watching each other. And in a game make the jumps with any consistency, she could barely stand, let alone time herself against a swinging obstacle. So she made a decision. Quietly, without any dramatic speeches, she took off her jacket, wrapped her baby inside it, and handed him to Gi-hun. He didn't argue. There wasn't time. He tied the makeshift sling to himself, adjusted the weight across his chest, and turned back toward the bridge, alone. Every jump he made was slower than before. The added weight shifted his balance, made his landings harder, and threw off his timing. But he kept moving. Step by step, rope by rope, he carried Junhee's child across while she stood at the edge and watched. She didn't try to follow, she didn't beg him to come back. She knew what the outcome had to be. If she tried to go with them, they'd both die. So instead, she chose to stay behind. Not because she gave up, but because she knew her life was already over. In a game that rewarded cruelty and betrayal, she chose to protect someone who couldn't even speak. That wasn't strategy. That was unconditional love. By the time Gi-hun reached the far platform, the rope had reached its fastest speed. More than half the players were gone. Some were eliminated by the rope, most by each other. The dolls didn't even have to adapt the difficulty. The group had self-destructed before the system could. What this game proved was simple. The physical challenge wasn't the rope. It was fear. Fear of falling. Fear of others. Fear that someone might grab you, shove you, or hesitate in front of you. Players weren't just racing the timer, they were racing the people behind them. And in the middle of all of that, one player carried a child across with no backup, no plan, and no guarantee he'd survive. In the end, the most dangerous part of the bridge wasn't the speed, it wasn't the spacing, it wasn't even the dolls. The real threat came from the other players. Because in this round, you didn't have to make a mistake to die. Someone else could make it for you. 3. Sky Squid Game. The final game was a twisted, elevated version of the original Squid Game. A callback to Season 1, but with higher stakes and lower chances of survival. 3 platforms, each suspended above a massive drop, shaped like the familiar symbols, a circle, a triangle, and a square. On each platform stood one player. The rules: one person from each platform had to be pushed off in order for that round to progress. But there was a catch. Nothing would happen until someone pressed the button that activated the game. No countdown, no automatic start. It was entirely in the player's hands. The round would remain frozen in time until someone made the first move. On the surface, this seemed like a social game, one built for negotiation, persuasion, and manipulation. Convince someone else to act first, form temporary alliances, make the right deal, and maybe, just maybe, you could avoid being the one who falls. It had all the ingredients of a game where talking was deadlier than running. But that illusion didn't last. Almost immediately, the players realized something chilling. The button didn't just begin the round, it decided the moment when everything could go wrong. Until it was pressed, nothing was official. Nothing was irreversible. Violence before the button didn't count. Strategy before the button, useless. Which meant the worst actions were not only possible, they were outside the rules entirely. That's when player 333, Myung-gi, made his move. He broke every unspoken boundary the game had left. Surrounded by desperation and suspended over death, he tried to kill his own baby. Not because it would win him the game, but because it might buy him leverage. If the baby died before the button was pressed, then technically, no one had to be pushed. The sacrifice would be made. The round could advance without him falling. It was the most horrifying calculation in the entire season. This wasn't just a betrayal of the other players, it was a rejection of humanity itself. Myung-gi wasn't trying to manipulate anyone. He wasn't bluffing. He was prepared to murder an infant, his own son, just to stay standing on a platform for a few minutes longer. And yet, even in that moment, the game didn't punish him, because it hadn't officially begun. Gi-hun had no choice but to intervene. He tackled Mayungi and in the struggle stabbed him to death. It was self-defense. It was necessary. But according to the rules, it didn't count. Because the button had him impressed. That's when the real decision came. Gi-hun could have walked away with the win. Myungi was dead. One platform was empty. All he had to do was wait, let the game expire, claim victory by default. No one would stop him, no one could blame him. But instead, he did something that made absolutely no tactical sense. He walked over to the button and pressed it. He pressed it knowing what it meant. The moment the button was activated, the rules kicked in. And with Myungi already dead, the system recognized Gi-hun himself as the only remaining candidate to be pushed from his platform. By pressing the button, he guaranteed his own death. It wasn't a calculated move. It wasn't a bluff to provoke someone else into action. It was the only way to keep the child alive, because if he didn't press it, the game might restart. The platform might reset. The next group might treat the baby the same way Myungi did, or worse. So Gi-hun made the one choice no one else would. He gave up everything, not for a win, not for revenge, not for strategy, just for mercy. In a season full of betrayal, deception, and cruelty, his final act wasn't about beating the game. It was about breaking its rules in the only way left, by refusing to play. And that's why it worked. Not because the system allowed it, but because the system had no defense against someone who wanted nothing for himself. He didn't win by pushing someone else off. He lost by choosing not to let someone else die in his place. In the end, there was no applause, no celebration, no prize, just silence, and one survivor too young to understand what it cost.